Hey everybody, what's going on? It's Harv. Let's continue our lecture into humanism during the Italian Renaissance. Um, I kind of split this lecture up in the previous lecture, if you remember, I kind of discussed the overall, kind of overarching important topics related to humanism, right? And kind of what humanism's all about, right? Remember, humanism is this modern way of thinking. This is intellectual history that Europeans are starting to think differently. When it comes to humanist thinking, right, we're looking at like more secular thinking, truth, critical analysis, being critical, uh, looking at things for yourself as opposed to having someone explain it to you. Humanism embodies individualism, being focused on the present as opposed to focusing on God or focusing on heaven, the afterlife. Okay, humanism is this modern way of thinking. All right, let's talk about some of the main important humanist thinkers. Okay, um, probably the most important and definitely one that I want you to know is Petrarch. Okay, he's considered the father of humanism. He was a poet, a writer. He loved to write. He wrote a new type of sonnet. Let's think about how that embodies humanism, right? Being creative, new ideas, doing something new. Okay, he wrote a new type of sonnet. Petrarch wrote, he would write poems to this woman named Laura, who he loved, but she was married to another man, so it was kind of weird. But he wrote this new type of poem. He also wrote lots of letters to dead people, the Romans. Okay? Important though, because he tried a lot of new things. Okay? Humanist. All right? We have Dante, Boccaccio. They're both medieval, but both really influential to humanist thinking in that they were writing their literature in the vernacular. Now, why is that? Why is that a humanist quality? Well, they're breaking with the status quo, which was literature before the Renaissance was mainly written in Latin. Okay, well, they're writing in the vernacular. They're writing in a language, a dialect that people understand. All right, remember we talked about the vernacular, or I talked about the vernacular in previous lectures. But Latin is kind of like the mother language of English, Spanish, Italian, French, German, Portuguese, and they're writing in the vernacular, in the language that the everyday common person speaks. Okay, not everyone during this time knows how to speak or read Latin. That's mainly reserved for educated, or especially the clergy. They're writing in a language that everyday average people speak, and that's new. Lorenzo Valla is really important. I find him fascinating, and he really embodies the humanist ideal of truth, accuracy, being critical. And there's a famous story with him in his disapproval of this document called the Donation of Constantine. So this document was kind of flaunted by the Catholic Church to have written during the time of the Roman Empire, during the time of Constantine. And Valla took a look at this document, read it, and he said that this document was not written during the Roman times. This document was fake or false. And people said, "How do you know? Why?" And he read the whole document for himself. He didn't have someone tell him about it or read it to him. He read it for himself. He was being critical. And he said this document definitely wasn't written during the Roman times because the word fief is in this document. And fief, that word did not exist during Roman times. That word existed during medieval times because of feudalism. So therefore, because of the existence of that word in this document, it could not have come from Roman times. And it shocked people. They're like, what? And he was looking for the truth. Was this document accurate? Was this document really written during Roman times? And he proved that it was not. Okay? Being critical, looking for the truth, looking at things for yourself as opposed to having someone think for you or tell you how something is. Important. Mirandola, really showcasing the influence of the ancient Greeks and Romans, just like Valla, and Mirandola set up an academy to study Plato and some of his ideas. Okay, and we have Castiglione. We're gonna read Castiglione in class. Okay, and we're gonna talk about his Book of the Courtier, We're going to also see a painting of him. When we look at the art, I took a selfie with that picture in the Louvre with him. It's a funny story. I'll tell you about it when we discuss the art. But he wrote a guide for courtiers, okay? And he kind of wrote a book on, what is an effective leader? What qualities should a courtier have? Okay, and he was a Renaissance man himself. Okay, we're gonna skip this video. Okay, I'll show this in class, but let's talk about Machiavelli. Okay, Machiavelli is a key humanist. Need to know Machiavelli for the AP exam. Super important. He is considered the first political scientist. Okay, we're going to discuss, people like John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, discuss a lot of different figures. Machiavelli is considered the first political scientist. He's one of the first humanists to really bring a critical lens and critically analyze what makes an effective ruler. He was thinking about this and he wrote about this. Okay, and so he was trying to find the truth of what makes a good leader, what makes a good ruler. Okay. His book that we 100% need to know for the AP exam is called The Prince, 1513. You need to know that book, need to know that date. Super important. The Prince is very, very important. And we're going to read some of it. Okay? We're going to read some of it together. So this book, ladies and gentlemen, was a guide for rulers. Much like the Book of the Courtier, a guide for being a courtier. All right? Very similar to Castiglione. And both Machiavelli and Castiglione were civic humanists. They're commenting on what makes a good ruler. Okay? So this is a guide. The Prince was a guide for being a ruler. And this is the idea that a prince should end instability, bring about a moral regeneration of society. But something about Machiavelli, and this is going to be really important for some of our thinkers, is that Machiavelli was actually a very pessimistic individual. He was super emo, okay? And he was really influenced by what was going on in Italy. And we're going to see kind of what was going on in Italy and how that affected him. Machiavelli hated people. He hated people. And he was really pessimistic on society. He did not trust men. Okay, he thought that men were bad. And we're going to see that. We're going to see, thinkers having different perceptions on people and how that influences some of their views later on. We'll see that with Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau in the Enlightenment. But you're going to see kind of his pessimistic viewpoint and how he views people in his writing. Okay? Machiavelli believed a government's goal should be stability. Not necessarily, we're going to see that be very different from some of the Enlightenment, like, John Locke's going to say people have the right to life, liberty, and property. People have these certain things. No, Machiavelli believed that a government's goal should be stability. And why do you think he's thinking that? Well, he sees the instability of Italy. Okay, he thinks that Italy is super unstable, men are terrible, people are terrible, and you're going to see that, that kind of in his writing. Okay, he has very famous quotes within his writing that are kind of like a guide for a prince. For example, the end justifies the means. Okay. This quote kind of means that it doesn't matter how you get there, as long as you achieve your goal, the end justifies the means that you got there. So, for example, if you cheat your way to success, okay, Machiavelli thinks that's okay because you achieved your goal. All right. If you're a brutal king and you brutalize your people, but they obey you, the end justifies the means. Okay. And you can see Machiavelli's view on people here through this next quote is better to be feared rather than loved. Okay, he thinks people are terrible. They are all snakes, and that they will stab you in the back at the first opportunity. And so he says it's better to have people fear you than for them to love you, because you can't trust them. Okay, if they fear you, they're more likely not to step out of line and do something bad to you. Okay, that's a big quote. But he also said it's better to be feared rather than loved, but not hated. He said you couldn't take it too far. Okay, so some interesting ideas from Machiavelli. Okay, and he's not providing really a guide to a dictatorship. He's merely providing his own observations, and a lot of his observations come from what he's seen going down in Italy. Okay, all right, and he believed that that leaders should act for reasons of the state. That's why you should be doing this for your country. Doing whatever you enact, do for your country. Okay. He was also considered a realpolitik. All right, and we'll kind of get there. He's very pragmatic, and we're going to talk a little bit about that term more second semester with Otto von Bismarck. This term is more associated with OVB, but Machiavelli was a realpolitik, and keep that in your mind for a synthesis. Okay, highlight that. But Machiavelli was pragmatic. Whatever it took for a leader to get things done, do it. All right, and that's what we're going to see OVB do when he unites Germany. Okay, let's finish up our lecture really quickly. Just talking about women. All right. We talked about Joan of Arc before. So if you have your lecture notes with women, let's get those lecture notes out. Remember, we're keeping women as women are a really important theme within this class. Let's make sure that we have organized notes concerning women. Okay. And have those all on one sheet of paper or in a notebook or in a certain color or whatnot. Okay. So really important for us to understand that men and women were very, very different during this time. Okay, they led very different lives. Okay, wealthy women did enjoy some access to education. Okay, but not all wealthy women were allowed to have an equal education, and that's going to be something important for us to kind of keep in our minds and discuss. Let's think about Castiglione when it comes to education, what he believed women should be, educated in. Women lost some status in the Renaissance compared to the women of Middle Ages. With feudalism gone, we're seeing less, female lords, female nobles, and with that loss of title comes with the loss of political power. So we see women, kind of losing a little bit of status during the Renaissance. All right. According to certain intellectual doctrines, women were to please men. That was a key belief during the Renaissance. That was what women should do. That's kind of like a role that they had, that they were expected to play. Definitely during this time there was many different double standards, but a very prominent double standard was a sexual double standard. Right, women were supposed to remain virgins and chaste, and were shunned if they were, if they had sexual relations with one man or many different men. They were called, certain words that were not good. Versus, if a man sleeps with many women or has many different sexual partners, he's considered. There's words that are given to that man, like, he's a playa, or he's a fox or something like that. Right? You see this sexual double standard. Okay. Where it's okay for men to, have multiple sexual partners, but for women, it's not. Very prominent still in our society today, very prominent back then as well. Okay, and we're going to be talking about this big theme for the rest of the year, but this idea of the role of women in society. What is their role in society? And we're going to see ideas about women, ideas about women when it comes to education, politics, economics, right? What is the role of women? This is something that we're going to be discussing for the rest of the year, and we're still having a discussion. Today we live in the United States. It's our country, has been around for a couple hundred years. We still haven't had a female president. So these are really interesting things. How many women are allowed to be in the military versus men? There's really women. I believe this is I think the 100th year that women are going to have the right to vote. Really interesting. We're going to have really interesting conversations about kind of the evolution of the role of women in society. Okay. We will see some female humanists, all right, educated women who promote some humanist ideologies. Really important for us to know Christine de Peasant. I want you to highlight her, circle, star. You got to know her. She, ladies and gentlemen, is considered our first feminist, okay? And she wrote a text called The Treasure of the City of the Ladies, and she put forth some ideas, feminist ideas on the role of women, and arguing for more equality when it comes to women. And we're going to talk about a lot of different feminists, okay? Mary Wollstonecraft, Olympia de Gouges, Emmeline Pankhurst, many different feminist thinkers. Christine de Peasant is one of the first feminists to start advocating for women. Okay. For peasant and lower class women, their status did not change much from the Middle Ages. Very in poor families, they tended to only have a nuclear family, which is like a mom, dad, and kids, not aunts, uncles, and grandparents having the extended family live in the house. Okay. For lower class families, and we're going to talk more about this in the third chapter in the Protestant Reformation. We'll go a little bit more over the social history, but marriage was typically economically based. That will change with the Protestant Reformation. With Protestants, marriage will be for love as opposed to economics. We'll start to see that shift. Property was involved, parents involved. You had arranged marriages. So marriage was a very different phenomena from what it is now. Okay. The average age married, you had women were a little bit younger than men. Okay, women were typically less than 20 years old. Men were in their mid to late 20s when they were married. Okay. You had infanticide and abandonment. And we'll talk about what that means. People would, if they had a child, sometimes they would let the child die or abandon their children. And divorce was commonly seen. Okay. One of the reasons why there's infanticide and abandonment is because during this time with poor families, sometimes poor families could not afford to have kids. Kids in poor families could not, afford to disrupt their life. Food is very scarce. Some peasant families could only produce or barely produce enough food for themselves. And if they have a child, now they have added responsibilities having to take care of the child. So that was definitely economics was in food supply was a huge motivation. And if couples had children in having to kill or get rid of their kid. Remember, during this time they don't have birth control, they don't have condoms and different types of protection. They have there's a lack of understanding when it comes to science and the biology of how reproduction works. So this is really important, and this is one of the reasons why if a couple gets pregnant, one of the reasons why they make those decisions, okay, of having to get rid of the child. Okay. Really quickly, we're going to talk just touch on slavery a little bit, because we're going to touch on slavery in the next part of this chapter with the Age of Exploration. But with the Black Death, we're going to see slavery start to there's going to be a big demand for slavery, okay? And that's because there's a labor shortage, and so there's going to be a need for slaves and need for labor. And so we're going to see slavery become much more prominent during the Renaissance, okay? Owners had complete control over slaves, and we're going to see in the Renaissance, in the Age of Exploration, we're going to see a slave trade start to become a very important, economic, part of the an economic center within Europe and the New World. We're going to see slavery become a very prominent part of the economy in the New World. Okay, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. Okay, let's stop here for today. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. And we are in our next lecture. We're going to discuss art, and that'll be on a different PowerPoint. Okay, and then we'll get into diplomacy. And some of the external wars in the Renaissance. Excellent job, everybody. I'll talk to you later.